Welcome to a special series called The Global Crisis Monitor, featured on the Treasury Update podcast. Thank you for joining. On this episode of the Global Recovery Monitor series, Craig Jeffery and Alexa Cook of Strategic Treasure explore Period 18's results from the COVID-19 Impact and Response Survey. This new data reveals how the news of vaccines resulted in a positive outlook across the medical, economic, and social fronts. It also covers shifts to top concerns, expectations on a global lockdown, and voluntary staff leave among businesses. Listen in on the latest updates reported by the Treasury and Finance community. Welcome back to the podcast, Craig and Alexa.
Thanks, Meredith. Good to be here.
Yeah, it is. It's been a while since we've done a recording for the Global Recovery Monitor.
Yes, I'm looking forward to the discussion. So we have now completed 18 survey periods in the Global Recovery Monitor. Craig, will you start us off with some of the top headlines?
Sure. By way of a public service announcement first, for those who are looking to take the survey and to download any of the reports or all the reports and the information from this, you can go to treasurycoalition.com and download information. And you talked about 18 survey periods, so we're pretty close to a year. We started this at the end of March, and we were originally, as of several months back, figuring we'd wrap up at the 1 year mark. But based on what we're seeing, it's likely we'll keep it open for several more periods, 2, 4, or 6 more months, depending on how things go. But as far as headlines, those that are voluntarily leaving the job force, it's a high number, and we'll get into that later. And for those companies where it's not about the same between men and women, it's quite a bit more women than men who are leaving the workforce. So that's a headline with some additional calibration from what we've said before on some other measurements as we continue. 45% of respondents expect a lockdown in their home country or home region by the end of February. And a net 29% think their company will perform better or significantly better than their industry. So that's pretty positive about the power of their own company. Alexa, you had some things too, I think.
That's great. And that's a good way to caveat into what I'm going to touch on, which is a little bit on the economy. So we typically talk about both the 3-month and the 12-month outlook. So those have both shifted again, and this time they're shifting positively. So this is making our equilibrium at less than 3 months this time. So we've never seen such a positive response for this 3-month time frame. So this is a really good outlook for us to see this time around.
That's encouraging. We regularly review 4 areas of impact. Any changes to the long-running positivity of the past month?
Yeah, last month we had three areas were positive and one wasn't positive or negative. And most of those have been positive after the first few weeks of the monitor, when we're in the depths of the COVID moving home. This is the impact of COVID on your community, on your business, a couple different factors, which you can see in the report, but all 4 snap back. They've improved on a period over period basis back to the large trend that we've been having for, well over 3/4 of a year now.
In this survey, we have cycled through some new questions, one of them asking if respondents had experienced staff voluntarily leaving the workforce or reducing hours. How did respondents answer this question to this period?
So respondents have really answered that they are definitely voluntarily leaving the workforce still. And we've seen a lot of them doing it a lot more since the last period. So we've seen a total of about 37% voluntarily leaving. And as Craig kind of alluded to earlier, that's an increase versus 25% in the last period. And like I said, Craig alluded that there was more females, and there's about a 9% gap between men and women. So there's definitely more women leaving the workforce. But again, that gap's only about 9% between men and women.
Yeah, a point of additional information on that. This is organizations, the people that are responding are talking to their organizations. They're not responding for themselves per se, but what they're seeing in their organization. So that's still over a third of organizations are seeing this event.
Another new question that we cycled in this period is, how did the vaccine impact your outlook? What were some of the results with this one?
Yeah, so we've long been talking, I think everyone's been thinking about the vaccine, the rush to develop and to test and then to distribute it. So the news of the vaccine, its distribution, however people would interpret that, has been positive as we'd expect, and it's been very positive, from 65% positive or very positive to close to 75%. But the order, we asked about medical, economic, and social impacts. The top impact was medical, which makes sense. Then economic, and then trailing economic was social. So we're measuring those three areas. So medical, economic, social.
Excellent. Were there any changes to the top concerns from the prior period?
Yeah, there was. So the most common forced rank question set we have, we've been running it almost every single period for a year now, practically. Number one by a long shot. And for those who have great memories or who are looking at the report, the direct financial impact to the business was tied with two others last time as the top concern. Well, this time, the direct financial impact of the business was number one by a long shot. That is far and away the top concern. The next was also a shift. It's recessions in the regions we operate in, and then country preparedness. I think that's really notable. So when we think about country preparedness, why would that be? How could that be? You can think about country preparedness to distribute vaccines. So they were created. We hit in the U.S. We hit the U.S. Thanksgiving, and then all the holidays from Christmas to New Year's. The shifting of administrations and some of the I'll call it the lull of activity, and then getting the vaccines out. So country preparedness may have been impacted by all of that activity. So we'll see how that takes place. But country preparedness hit that top list. We haven't seen that in the top three ever since the beginning. The second forced rank item, forced rank survey question, where we're taking the average, not the top one. The COVID response impact was number one. That was the same as last time. Civil unrest as a top concern was number two. Civil unrest in North America, let's be specific about that one. And then third was the COVID death rate. So those have stayed the same. Potential changes in taxation took up the number four spot. So, in the U.S. in particular, shifting administrations, I would say the increase in debt, concerns about taxes, that was the fourth item there. You want me to keep going on a couple other elements, Meredith?
That would be great.
So paying vendors and suppliers, that's always a concern on the AR side. That's been one of our most negative elements. Almost 22.5% of companies are paying slower. Surprisingly or happily, 7.8% of companies are paying faster to support their vendors to be good citizens. So that's a net 14.2% paying slower than before the pandemic. So that's a pretty significant impact in the industry. This has moved up and down a bit through the cycle, but on a less negative or a positive note, shifting from less negative, if you will, on staffing contraction, the question about what's happening with expectations. Is your organization going to expand jobs or contract? The net is a 4% net contraction versus a net 18% contraction the prior period. So that's really tightened in almost to neutral position. So 27% expect a contraction, 23% expect expansion, leaving us with that almost neutral number of negative 4%. So that's a pretty big jump in one period, which is the two prior months.
Interesting. Thanks for running through all those percentages for us. How are the time estimates for health and financial normalcy looking?
So the inflection point has moved back to just under 3 months from the prior period, which we saw at 5 months. This is a great pullback for that. And then for the peak death rate, this one came in pretty similar to the prior period, which was just at over 2 months. So this one stayed pretty steady. And then for the health outlook, the extension of time until the COVID-19 became a minor health issue, this one's pulled back a bit as well. And this is sitting right between about 9 and 10 months. And comparing that to the prior period, which was at about 11 and a half months, that's a pretty good number to come back to about 9 to 10 months. So that's also a good number for us to see for that. And then lastly, for financial normalcy in individual businesses, this came in at about 11 months. So this was a bit of an increase from the prior period, which was about 10 to 10 and a half months. But, based on some of the numbers that we've seen in the survey so far, that's not super surprising to see that push out, about 2 to 4 weeks.
Mm-hmm. So each period, it's coming. I typically ask you about AR and fiscal policy. Any changes on the negative outlook here?
Not really, not too much change. The organizations, the respondents' organization, we always ask about their future liquidity position. Is it positive or negative? And it's maintained positive period over period. So it's 13%, a net 13% of organizations have indicated the organization's future liquidity position has improved. So that's positive no matter what. It's not as rosy as 17.3% from the prior period to the period before that, but it's still positive, and so that's good news. On the net negative side, AR was about the same ratio of negative on the period-by-period basis, 15% negative. So that still indicates some deterioration. Fiscal policy actions or inactions. This churned 20% negative, net negative, versus 16% the prior period. So that's creeping up. Central bank activity, central bank provided liquidity still stays in that positive territory of about 10% positive.
Thanks for that recap, Craig. Before we wrap up the episode, what do we need to be thinking about for the weeks ahead?
I would say as we're looking at this, we look at infections and the impact of vaccinations. It seems like most of the respondents are looking at that to see how that's working. So we're asking some questions about, we're not using the term herd immunity, but what level of vaccinations do you think will allow us to return to whatever the new normal is? So those are a couple of things we're looking at. We're also going to look at staffing levels and expectations, positive outlook on the human front for positions, and then finally the broader economic outlook beyond just the staffing levels. What's going on in the broader economy, and then within individual companies. Those are the things that we're keeping a closer eye on.
Well, thank you both for sharing these insightful results, and I look forward to catching up with you both next month as we continue to monitor and cover the global state of recovery in 2021. We wanted to encourage you to take the Global Crisis Monitor survey repeatedly while it's live. It runs from Wednesday to Tuesday every week. You can go to treasurycoalition.com and follow the links. Add your voice and insight so that as a profession, we can take positive and knowledgeable steps to move our organizations and nations forward. Invest 5 minutes each week at treasurycoalition.com and get great information and insights while helping our profession and organizations.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.